And we're live. Dan, thanks for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate you giving us some time to talk through your experience in the military. I'd like you to start with a little background for us. So if you can tell us where you're at now, what you're doing, how you're doing.
Yeah, so we live outside of Atlanta, kind of up the I-75 corridor towards Chattanooga. We have been here in the Atlanta area for about 25 years. I am a self-employed as a real estate developer, something that I've been doing for about 5 years now.
And if I understand correctly, as soon as you were doing this before you retired or as you transitioned out?
So I sold computer security solutions for a long time in my civilian job, going all the way back to roughly year 99, 2000, when I first left active duty, and then I just decided to leave that profession really about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay. So there's some overlap in the real estate development and the computer security solutions, I should say.
Correct. Yep.
Interesting. So take me way back to 1900 and something, the year of our Lord, 1900 and something.
Yeah, 1972.
When you decided to join the military.
I'm grew up as an Army brat. My dad was originally drafted to go to Vietnam, and when he came back from Vietnam, he just decided to stay in and make it a career. So I grew up typical Army brat. I was born at Fort Polk. We moved to Alabama, New York. Spent a lot of time in Germany. Germany's where I actually graduated high school from.
Which school?
Bamberg American High School.
Really?
Yeah.
I graduated in Germany as well.
Oh, nice. Where?
Bad Aibling Station. It's a little south of Munich.
Okay.
What year did you graduate?
90.
Okay, I graduated in '94, so there's a gap there. Interesting. Sorry for interrupting, but
great place. Great place to go to high school. I was 17 when I left Germany to go to college. And when I got to college, it was just natural for me to start spending time in the ROTC classes, and eventually I got an ROTC scholarship, which paid for the rest of my college, and got commissioned upon graduating in '95.
Okay, what did you do when you came in?
I was an infantry officer, originally assigned to 82nd Airborne in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Well, that's a tough job. That's a tough job.
A phrase I've used a lot is I never worked so hard to be a mediocre compared to my peers.
That's a tough place to be. Bragg's an animal.
Yeah.
Did you stay in past your first service commitment?
So I commissioned in '95. My first service commitment was up in 1999. At the time, so I have a computer science degree. In 1999, it seemed like a good time for me to leave the service. I transitioned out with my computer degree, security clearance. We moved to Huntsville, Alabama. I got a job as a contractor at Redstone Arsenal, and transitioned from infantry officer to Oracle database developer, tracking aviation repair parts for U.S. Army Aviation.
It's only a small transition from one thing to the other, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty. It was, the dynamic was pretty strange. At that point is when I decided to join the Alabama National Guard. I think joining the National Guard really kind of helped me in my transition, in that I was around guys that kind of understood what my background was, and like we've talked before just about the camaraderie of being able to be around people that get you. Mm-hmm. So it made the transition into civilian life a lot easier being part of the National Guard.
And did you stay an infantry officer in the Guard?
I did for a long time. I was fortunate I was able to get picked up by one of the Army National Guard Special Forces groups. I had a lot of fun with them and stayed there as long as I could. I actually passed up promotion to major twice so that I didn't have to leave.
Oh, really? Did you stay in Alabama the whole time, or did you?
Alabama, yep. I stayed in the Alabama Guard all the way up until about 2014. I did a deployment with that unit 2002 to 2003, kind of in the earlier days of Afghanistan. And when I came back, I just decided to stay in.
Okay. And that deployment, That was Iraq, Afghanistan?
That was Afghanistan. Yep, 02, 03.
And that was as an infantry officer, so you've
Yep.
seen some very interesting things.
I mostly worked in the operations cell for
Okay.
just overseeing the missions that the SF teams were doing.
Okay. So more of a interesting. So going from 2 weeks a year, one month, or I'm sorry, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, do full-time guard or full-time active duty again in the deployed environment? That had to take a little getting used to, yeah.
Not really. I loved it. I wanted to go. It's where I wanted to be. As soon as 9/11 happened, I started asking around, trying to figure out a way to go participate. And I was fortunate to link up with the guys that I did. And coming back, at the time I was working for a company called Internet Security Systems. They eventually got purchased by IBM. When in that transition home, it was pretty decent because my immediate boss was a Vietnam era Marine, and so he understood the dynamic of somebody coming back from a combat rotation overseas into trying to integrate back into civilian life. So the transition from Afghanistan back into corporate security of an IT company was better than I probably thought it could have been.
Was it difficult on you to go from that kind of constant on edge, lots and lots of adrenaline to I would imagine, not nearly as much adrenaline?
Yeah, not nearly as much adrenaline. I think for me it was losing or kind of the newfound lack of responsibility, kind of lack of true purpose that had a higher meaning. When deployed overseas, so concerned about the guy to your left and your right that you pour every ounce of energy you have into ensuring the guys are safe and they're doing what they're supposed to do, and all the threats are mitigated. And if they need help, you do everything you can to get them the help that they're asking for. And then leaving that was certainly a hard transition.
So how did you try to fill up that void in responsibility and I would say care for others in some way, or did you continue to plod on in the computer security realm?
So staying in the unit helped. Not choosing not to get out of the National Guard when I came home certainly helped a lot, because when we went back to the 1 weekend a month or the 2 weeks a year, you had people that were going through the same thing that you were going through.
And I would imagine that's so you were all. I don't want to say volunteer because everybody's volunteer, but everybody there was no active guard in your unit, so almost everybody was in the same kind of rotation that you were in. So
yeah, getting
back together in those times was probably, to your point, very, very comforting.
Yep. It becomes your that's where your center of gravity is. You start looking forward to the weekend and being around the people that you had served with overseas. So I'm fortunate that unlike an active duty unit, when you redeploy, a lot of people they get orders to PCS or permanent change of station. So I was fortunate that for a long time after that group that I had served with was still around.
No, nice. And so all those guys that you went over with were out of Alabama, the Alabama Guard?
Well, it was all Alabama Guard, but probably a third of the unit did live outside of Alabama.
Okay. And even when you moved to the Atlanta area, you were still going back to Huntsville for your weekends?
Yep.
And that was your first deployment? Was that your only deployment?
No, not my only deployment. In a different unit in Alabama National Guard, we went to Iraq 2010, 2011. I eventually had to leave the SF group. I had mentioned before I had deferred promotion to major twice. I was reaching a retention control point where I had to get promoted or I had to get out. So I found an EOD group that needed an intel officer. So I kind of did a career transition from infantry to intel, and went over there to Iraq as their intel officer.
So did you stay? You did not stay with the Alabama National Guard when you transitioned over to intel officer. You went.
I did. Yeah, that was still inside.
Oh, you did? Okay.
That was still inside the Alabama Guard.
Oh, nice. Okay. So then you deployed to Iraq. That was another 1 year?
Yes, but I mobilized about a year before my unit did because I had a lot of intel training to do. I had a lot of training to do just in relation to the counter IED fight that we were going over there to work in.
So you trained for about a year here stateside and then deployed over
overseas. Yep.
Where was the bulk of that training at?
So day to day, I was going down to Opelika, Alabama, which is near Auburn University. All over, I was out in Arizona for intel training. I was all over the DC area for training and work-related stuff inside the intel communities that are based in and around DC.
And luckily, well, not luckily enough, I'm pretty sure there's a law around it, but you stayed in the job that you had the entire time, your civilian job.
For the civilian job, yeah. The law around that is upon your return, you can be gone for up to 5 years, and then once you return, they don't necessarily have to give you your same job back. They have to give you the same level of responsibility at the same pay, and if there were scheduled pay increases, then that would take effect as well. I worked during the second deployment, I worked for IBM. They were actually very good with their military leave policy. And so I never had any concerns about what my job was going to be, once I returned.
So, deployed with an EOD group, that probably a completely different, completely different deployment than the first one. 2010. Mm-hmm. You said 10 to 11, so
correct. Yeah.
IEDs were hot and heavy then. I know a couple guys got blown up around that time. How was that transition from essentially a job that you had never done into an EOD group?
It was fun. I liked it a lot. I loved learning. So in my computer security job, there's a lot of intel and operations kind of overlap, and a lot of the same systems that we use in the cybersecurity fight we use in the IED fight. Right, the intel process is similar. The operations process is similar. So it was a really good fit for me, going from intel officer in the counter IED space, into and then back into or out of and back into cybersecurity.
Okay. And again, when you left active duty, who'd you stay attached to? Because you stayed in the Guard, you didn't retire at that point. Who'd you stay attached to kind of, ground yourself?
Yeah. So I stayed in the EOD group for probably 2 years after we came back from Iraq. Around 2014, 2015, I transitioned into the Army Reserve and got picked up into an IMA slot, Individual Mobilization Augmentee, and kind of finished out my career over the next 7 years, roughly, as an IMA.
Where was that at? Who were you attached to then?
So my first year, 2015, I was in U.S. Army Pacific out of Fort Shafter, Hawaii. And then the remainder of my time, I was with Special Operations Command Pacific out of Camp Smith, Hawaii. So as a reservist, as an IMA, attached to an active duty unit, I didn't do the 1 week in a month. I didn't do the 2 weeks a year. I would go to Hawaii for 4 weeks at a time, and then that was my annual requirement. So every roughly February or March, I'd go do 4 weeks and then come back.
When you say it like that, it sounds really tough.
It does sound tough. I also need to follow that up with, it's not where I was. Oahu is not the tropical paradise everybody thinks of when they think of Hawaii. Also, going over as an individual, working with people that are permanent party there, they go home to their families at night. They are spending time with their families on the weekends. I would leave work and go to the hotel and and try to be a tourist. But after a couple of weeks, I miss my family and I'm missing stuff as my kids are growing up. I was ready to come home.
So how you've gone from active duty to Air National Guard not Air National Guard, Army National Guard to reserve. How difficult are those movements from one branch or from one service department to another? How was that challenging to do? Did you take a lot of effort, or was it pretty easy?
The transition from the Guard to reserve was actually pretty easy. Showing up to an active duty unit for 4 weeks at a time, I just appears like some random guy showing up for a short period of time. It was hard for me to get engaged from a work perspective because I really wasn't there long enough to have a real impact on whether it's plans or policy. But they embraced everybody that came in and made me feel welcome and comfortable.
When I was at USAFE, United States Air Forces in Europe, we had a couple of IMAs that came up to headquarters, and it was the same thing. They were there just long enough that you didn't want to give them just menial tasks, and they had to do certain things. So it was a very difficult balancing act to plug them in a way that made sense for everybody involved.
Yeah.
So total time. How much total time have you served?
26 and a half years.
Nice. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your service.
Appreciate it. About 7 of that is active duty between my initial active duty service obligation and my 3 mobilizations / 2 deployments.
So what was the impetus to call it quits, to retire?
So I was reaching I had a federal mandatory retirement date after 28 years, and I was reaching that. My 26 and a half years when I did decide to retire was coming out of COVID. Trying to go back to Hawaii during those time frames made it super difficult because they were still requiring a 14-day quarantine to come on island. It didn't make sense for me to be there 24 days with 14 days of it being in a quarantine. And so since I knew that I was coming up on 28 years active federal service, I just decided to, put in my paperwork for retirement.
Did you find that to be a difficult decision?
No, I knew that it was coming. I was super happy to be where I was. I tell people I was going to stay in that slot in Hawaii until the wheels fell off, and they finally fell off.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that would be a hard one to walk away from. That's for sure. So now that you are retired, so you retired in, if I do my math right around 2020, 2021?
Yeah, roughly around there.
Okay. Now that you're not attached to any units, do you find yourself wanting to be reattached to some folks that do the same thing, did the same thing?
It's hard not for me to look at contract jobs that are overseas. I keep in contact with some of my close buddies. I was over in Alabama yesterday playing golf with a guy that I was in both Afghanistan and Iraq with. So we try to keep those relationships ongoing. It's like the time we see each other kind of goes a little bit farther in between visits, but we try to maintain those relationships.
Do you find that you initially talked about the kind of sense of responsibility for other people, for essentially life, limb, and eyesight of other people, very, very important stuff. Do you find that you miss that level of responsibility?
I certainly do miss it. I've become a lot better at coping with it over time. I think the travel schedule that I had as a civilian kind of made me think more and more of my family on a day-to-day basis. And really kind of give me the realization that, my purpose in this phase of life is to make sure that my family's taken care of and that they're my priority.
So you've kind of transitioned that responsibility. Not that you weren't responsible for your family before,
Right.
but all in.
Yeah, much bigger emphasis. For a long time I had, it in my head that, the harder I worked, the better I could provide. But the downside of that was the harder I worked meant the longer amount of time I was away from them.
That is a great. You phrased that very well. I've had that very same concern over the years, and known a lot of others that have. If you bust your face working, then of course everybody's going to be happy, but everybody just wants you around.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what do you think? If you had to look back on it, what was the most challenging transition for you? Which one was the most difficult in all of those?
Probably dealing with people. I guess dealing with conflict in the workplace. In the military, especially places where I grew up in my early days in the military, being an infantry guy. We handle conflict differently than what is allowed in the workplace today. And so that's.
I don't know what you mean, Dan. What do you mean?
That happened very early on. Way back when I first left active duty. There was conflict with an employee, and I expressed my opinion in the only way I knew how, and it's lessons learned.
It was not received well, is what you're saying?
Not received well. Still to this day, I believe it was appropriate, but not received well.
Understand. Did that change? Did that change how you interacted with folks in the civilian world? Like, was that a learning experience for you that you carried on, or did you choose to not maintain the same level of responsibility in the civilian world?
No, I continued on, and over time I realized it's not them, it's me. And if I want to continue to do this, then I have to adjust myself. And I kind of was able to find pockets of things that helped me along the way. Eventually, I came into a more technical sales role within the cybersecurity, and was selling technical person and the selling relationship of cybersecurity solutions. But eventually, I got customer facing into the DoD side, and so I was able to go visit Air Force bases and Navy bases, and eventually Army became my customer. And so as I was going out onto these Army bases, it helped a lot in that civilian career, because I had got my purpose back. I'd felt like now I'm the one, now I'm the support guy for the infantry guy on the ground, because eventually everything that I do was to support the warfighter.
When was that? What was the? Did you start working with the DoD folks? When was that?
Yeah, probably around 2005, 2006. So a bulk of my career on the civilian side, I was able to do that. Towards the latter part, I was able to get into a gig selling healthcare, or selling to healthcare in Florida, and that was a great gig. But eventually, I went back to DoD.
I was going to ask if you saw a difference in the active duty Army that you left in the active duty Army that you were then dealing with. If there was because that was a couple of years, 6 years in between the two, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So, well, the fights were still going on. Afghanistan and Iraq were still a priority, and so even for my civilian job, there was a couple of times I did take a couple of trips over to Kuwait to try to help as far forward as possible.
Okay. If you could go back and change anything or do anything differently, what would you do differently?
I probably would have tried to go into a contractor role a lot earlier than I did, meaning try to get back to DoD facing. When I left active duty and we moved to Atlanta, the computer and IT boom was happening, I was excited to get any job. But I was, to try to correlate my history and my path back into the DoD, I probably would have tried to do a little bit sooner.
Get closer to what you know.
Yeah, for sure. I had an ID card my whole life, right? I was born in an Army hospital. I wasn't even born in a civilian hospital. I was born in World War II barracks at Fort Polk. That mindset, and over time you realize that mindset is never going to leave. That's just the fabric of who I am. And so instead of trying to fight that out of me, I just adjust it and refocus.
It makes a lot of sense to get you in a position for success based on what you know and what you completely understand. I agree with you. I've had an ID card my whole life as well, and it's weird. It's weird when,
I go to an Army base now, and I see the same. Every Army base has the same brown signs for buildings, and building numbers, don't match. Building 201 is not next to building 202. It's building 201 and 498, and then there's 205. But for me, when I go and I see that feels like home.
Absolutely. I love going. I love the brown signs on every base, and you go, I know exactly where I'm going. I know how to get there. There's a bunch of them. Would you give? So when you retired, when you decided to retire from the Guard, you were only you were doing the 30 days a year or 4 weeks a year. So not a huge maybe transition for you at that point in terms of retiring, other than losing the touch point of being around folks.
Yeah.
Would you give yourself any advice around that? Should you have done it earlier? Should you have stayed longer? Should you have stayed Guard? Because I know the retirement kind of collection is a little different with reserve.
I think I did the right path for me. I don't think I would have changed any of that path. What I did is probably not the right path for everybody, but it was the right path for me. I think I moved when I needed to move, stayed when I needed to stay, and I don't think I would have changed any of that.
Would you give yourself any different advice, the Dan now and prior to retiring Dan? Would you have given yourself any advice now? Yeah,
I would say, go to sick call if you're hurt. Growing up in two different environments, really, being the infantry community and then the SF community, even inside the National Guard, your aches and pains add up over time. And without documentation, it makes your VA disability claim a lot harder. But those, that's just how we grew up in. Leaders in the infantry, they don't have time to, be hurt. They don't have time to, have headaches, or they don't have time to be sick. You're expected to do your job regardless of how you're feeling that day.
Every single day.
Yep.
Going to sick call takes time, which you don't have any of.
Yeah, I went to sick call once. I was in a parachuting accident. And the next day my back was hurting, so I went to sick call the next day.
That's the only time?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably a lot of things added up over the course of your career.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man. So that's all I got for you, Dan. I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate you making the time for it. If you have any closing comments that you'd like to share with the world.
No, I would just say, if you're in the military, document your injuries. You're going to need that when it comes time for when you get out, VA disability claims. Don't sleep on that. Don't look at it as a handout. You need to look at it as those are benefits that you have earned.
Very well said. Very, very well said. I know myself as well that feels very handouty, even though you've done all of the time. Yes. Well, thanks again, Dan, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me on.